Arvin Gibson met John Hernandez when he came to his home in 1996 to be interviewed by Sandra Cherry, a near-death researcher doing work for her master's thesis. John had previously called Gibson from Colorado after having read one of Gibson's books. On that occasion, John explained over the telephone what led to his NDE. His experience was sufficiently interesting that Gibson's local chapter of IONS invited John to tell his story at one of their meetings. John began the day with a feeling of foreboding and indicated to his wife that he might never see his family again. He found that many others on the crew also felt uneasy. He said it was difficult to explain, but that he was uncomfortable leaving his family on that day. He had a premonition that something untoward was about to happen, but he felt duty-bound to respond to his work commitments. John was a large man, several inches taller than my 6 feet 2 inches. He had an athletic build and moved with the easy grace of someone at home with his frame. He spoke with a quiet humility, not uncommon to large men. His appearance and demeanor were not surprising, though, since he had already told me of his occupation. He was a member of an elite firefighting group called the Hot Shots, a crew whose job it was to be dropped into particularly troublesome forest fires and bring them under control. During a wilderness fire in 1989, a helicopter dropped John, as crew boss, and two 20-person hotshot crews onto a fire at the top of a steep mountain. The fire was burning below the crews in thick ponderosa pine and oak brush. The wind was blowing the fire downhill away from the crews. The decision was made to try and construct a fire line downhill towards the existing fire with one crew, and have the second crew follow, starting a backfire into the main blaze. Creating a fire line involved clearing a path 6 feet down to mineral soil by using power saws and other hand tools. The second 20-person crew, whose job was to initiate the backfire, started lighting any unburned fuel in front of the newly constructed fire line. The fire they were lighting was supposed to burn ahead of them, with the wind down the slope toward the primary blaze, thus stopping the main fire from advancing any further. The slope of the hill the men and women were working on was about 40 degrees. They worked their way down the steep slope when, partway down, to their horror, the wind changed to an upward direction. The trees in front of the men and women traveling down the hill erupted into flames with explosive force. John explained how firefighters have a fire-resistant pack that is carried on their web gear. The pack includes an aluminum foil-type material that they can throw over themselves as they crouch to the ground in an emergency. These foils are only effective if the people can deploy the shelters after properly preparing the ground by reaching mineral soil with no residual flammable organic materials. The problem, in this case, was that the enormous winds caused by the inferno erupted all around them, and the immediacy of the crisis made the shelters useless. The panic-stricken crews started to try and go back up the trench trail they had built. Trees exploded, and fire engulfed the immediate area, and oxygen feeding the conflagration was sucked from near the ground where the people struggled to breathe. One by one, the men and women fell to the earth, suffocating from lack of oxygen. They were reduced to crawling on their hands and knees while they attempted to get back up the hill to a safer area. Suddenly, John had the thought, "This is it. I am going to die." And with that thought in mind, he found himself looking down at his body, which was lying in a trench. The noise, heat, and confusion from the inferno surrounding them were gone, and John felt completely at peace. As he looked around, John saw other firefighters standing above their bodies in the air. One of his crew members had a defective foot, which he had been born with. As he came out of his body, John looked at him and said, "Look, Jose, your foot is straight." A bright light then appeared. John described the bright light in this manner. The light, the fantastic light. It was brighter than the brightest light I had ever seen on Earth. It was brighter than the sun shining on a field of snow. Yet I could look at it, and it didn't hurt my eyes. The light parted, and John saw numerous people, many of whom were his deceased relatives, and pets were there along with members of his family. Standing in the light was John's deceased great-grandfather, who died when John was 9 years old. He appeared as an old man, so he could be easily recognized, then changed to look younger, about 30. He told John that they could appear in forms, so they could be recognized. He also told him that he had been assigned to look after him during his lifetime on Earth. He also acted as John's guide throughout his NDE. John met with others of his ancestors and had extensive experience. His great-grandfather ultimately communicated by mind to John that it was John's choice whether or not he should return to Earth. Not wanting to come back from the beautiful and peaceful place that he was in, John argued with his great-grandfather. Explaining that it would be devastating to return to a burned body, John pled with his great-grandfather to remain. John said that all of this communication was by questions he would think of and have instantly answered in his mind. John was informed that neither he nor any of his crew who chose to return would suffer ill effects from the fire. This would be done so that God's power over the elements would be made manifest. Returning to his body was one of the more painful events of his life. When I asked John why it was painful, he said, "When I was there, everything was so perfect, and my spirit body, it was so free. It felt like everything was limitless. When I came back, well, you know, there's always something plaguing you, like arthritis, or sore muscles, but not there. Getting back into my physical body felt cramped and held back. For example, when I used to play football, for a few days after a game or hard practice, I was always sore. The same thing was true after coming back into my physical body. I hurt and felt constrained, and it was hard to get used to for some time." Finding himself again in his body, John looked around and noticed that some of the metal tools they had used to fight the fire had melted. Despite this intense heat and the fire still raging around him, he was able to walk up the hill in some sort of protected bubble. He did not hear or feel the turbulence around him. Upon reaching the relative safety of the hilltop, the noise of the fire was again evident, and he saw other members of the crew also gathered there. The entire happening was so profound that upon escaping from what they had supposed would be sure death, the group of saved people knelt in prayer to thank the Lord for their deliverance. All of the crew escaped, and the only visual evidence on them of what they had been through was a few singed hairs. John said that in comparing reports of their different episodes, the men and women were astonished that they had each undergone some type of near-death experience. And this happened to a diverse ethnic and religious group of Hispanics, Caucasians, and American Indians. Throughout the summer, as the crew worked together, they continued to discuss the miraculous adventure which they had lived through. Others of the crew confirmed, for example, that they also felt the ill effects of returning to their physical bodies. They, too, had met with other members of their deceased families and were given the choice of remaining where they were or of returning to Earth. That does it for the Firefighters' shared NDE. Moving on to John's individual NDE. The day started normally with James and I saddling up our horses and riding half a day looking for livestock belonging to the family. We had not had any luck, so we decided to eat lunch. After lunch, we located 10 or 15 head, and we decided to take them to headquarters and call it a day. As is typical, we split up to gather the livestock together. Shortly after splitting up, my horse blew up with me and drove the saddle horn deep into my groin area. Unbeknownst to me, this caused extensive internal bleeding. I must have been thrown off and knocked unconscious for a length of time. When I came to, James was urging me to wake up. I responded, but in a fog. I did not know where I was, who he was, or why I was lying on the ground. As my head cleared and James recalled the events to me, it became clear I was seriously hurt. While wrestling with trying to stay conscious, my deceased grandfather and deceased great-grandfather appeared to me. They both took over the situation and instructed me to tell James to go for help. This I did. My grandparents agreed to split up. One stayed with us, and the other went with James. It seemed like hours that James was gone when it was only minutes. As James rode off, my horse followed him, reins flying in all directions. I must have been to this part of the ranch hundreds of times and could count on one hand the number of people I had encountered. The same is true today. This area is very remote. James said he had barely reached the main road when a truck stopped with Colorado license plates. The driver had seen my horse without a rider and suspected something must be wrong. As it turned out, the driver and his wife were a doctor and a nurse visiting New Mexico. They lived in Denver, Colorado. When they returned, the doctor could tell I was near death and asked James to go with the doctor's wife to Cuba, New Mexico, for help. Later, an ambulance arrived, and it was determined that I needed a flight for life because of the extent of my injuries. While waiting for the helicopter to arrive, several people from my town arrived, including members of my family. As each spoke to me, a different deceased member of their immediate family would come forward from a large group of deceased persons gathered around me. One interesting aspect of this situation was that I was puzzled over the fact that I could see and communicate with these deceased people, but their relatives could not. It bothered me so much that I told one lady ambulance driver, whom I knew, that she was rude in not embracing her father, whom I also knew and who had died some years before. She dismissed my chastisement as a delusion caused by my injuries. One who did believe me was my grandmother, who had come from town when the ambulance arrived. Her deceased husband was present, and I told her so. She began to cry, especially when I mentioned that he told me she would be coming to him shortly. She died 3 months later. While I was in this condition and could see and communicate with people who had passed on, I saw several events which I understood could happen in the future. Some were distressing to me, since they involved catastrophes about which I could do nothing. One circumstance that I saw, however, was a joyous one. Another son would be born to me. At the time, I was single with no particular prospects for marriage. Subsequently, I met and married a lovely lady, and my wife and I both rejoice over the birth and life of Sebastian. Arvin Gibson stated, "John's recovery required extensive surgery and physical therapy. Today he can walk with some difficulty. The feeling has returned to the lower portion of his legs, but not entirely to the upper portion. As we conversed, I got the same impression from John that I previously did, of a man thoroughly involved in living life to the fullest. He sounded upbeat and optimistic about the future." That does it for both of the experiences today. If you're interested in checking out more of these particular experiences, I suggest reading Arvin S. Gibson's They Saw Beyond Death. You can find a link to it in the pinned comment. With that said, what did you guys think about this shared NDE? Let me know in the comment section below. Until the next video, be blessed.